I only have four stories for you this afternoon, but each one is a bigger deal than the previous one, or did I get that in the wrong order? Anyway, they're all big deals. So let's get into it. We have a huge story about SpaceX on their launch next week, and Brian Wang predicted it. We have 24/7 Wall Street nailing the special part about Tesla. And when will Model Y actually ship? Well, let's go ahead with Sawyer Merritt here. He says that SpaceX, for the first time, Starship will carry V3 Starlink satellites to space, which aim to greatly expand the network's capacity and user speed. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, might have been 10 days ago, I asked Brian on this very channel, I said, Brian, do you think that they would put any of those V3s in number 13? And Brian said, sure, why not? Why wouldn't they put some in? If they blow up, they blow up. And so anyway, then he kind of walked that back. I have to admit, last week, Brian walked it back a little bit and said, well, they'll put them in 14. Well, guess what? As part of the initial test, Starship is planning to deploy 20. They're not playing around, 20 satellites, which will extend solar arrays and antennas and will attempt to connect with ground stations in South Africa and the larger Starlink constellation via high-capacity lasers. Six of those satellites, or six other satellites, I'm not, 6 of the 20 is my best guess here, of the satellites have been modified with a suite of cameras to scan Starship's heat shield and transmit energy down to operators to continue testing methods of analyzing Starship's heat shield readiness so that it can have a return launch site and have the actual Starship return and then be reusable. Several get caught and be reusable. Several tiles on the Starship have been painted white to simulate missing tiles and serve as imaging targets in the tests. Let's take a summary here. Here's a summary of every major upgrade and modification. SpaceX says it made these modifications for the upcoming test flight. It has more robust stage separation flip sequence to prevent the booster from rotating off course like it did last time. It has hardware upgrades to improve Super Heavy Raptor relight reliability during the boost back burn, another issue that they had. Updated engine alarms and abort logic for multi-engine flight conditions. Starship propulsion system hardware and operational changes to address the Flight 12 engine out issue. A lot of stuff dealing with number 12 and those failures. First deployment of 20 Starlink V3 satellites. We just said that with laser links. We got 6 Starlink satellites, we said. White painted heat shields, got that. New heat shield tile designs and attachment mechanisms, including tests of the aft flaps and aft skirt. Okay. Load sensing, let's do that one more time. Load sensing heat shield tiles to measure stressors during flight, higher dynamic pressure ascent profile to stress test the heat shield and increase payload capability, and finally, planned in-space Raptor engine relight test. So that is going to make this baby all ready. If it passes all those tests, it's going to be ready to really roll them out. Like one flight a month is what we think is going to happen fairly rapidly. From 24/7 Wall Street, the first phase of the artificial intelligence boom rewarded the companies building the digital infrastructure. You know who we're talking about, TSMC, NVIDIA, etc. Hyperscalers are spending hundreds of billions of dollars expanding data centers to power the next generation of AI services. That investment cycle isn't over, but the market's attention is beginning to shift toward the businesses turning that consuming power, that consumption power, into products consumers actually use. We've been talking about this all weekend. It's what everybody's talking about right now. Where is the ROI? Where's it going to come from? But few companies are better positioned for that transition than Tesla, which combines an AI application with something few competitors can match, its own computing infrastructure. Tesla controls more of the AI stack, is the headline for part 2 of this article. Of course, if you read the book, AI Rising, months and months and months ago, you would be following this AI stack business a lot more closely. I'm going to still recommend it. I'm going to recommend you buy it right now. I think it's $3.99 on Kindle, something like that. Maybe it's $2.99. I can't remember, but it's affordable. Maybe you want to spend $12.99. I think it's $12.99 and get the paperback, or I think it's like $17.99. You can buy the Audible too. It comes in the Audible. You can listen to it. Most AI application companies operate as tenants. They rent computing power from cloud providers like SpaceX, pay for inference every time an AI model runs, and accept lower margins as usage expands. Tesla has taken a different path. It has invested billions of dollars building its own AI training infrastructure, including its Cortex supercomputer and custom Dojo hardware. It also designs its own full self-driving chips that power vehicles already on the road and that will be powering Optimus shortly. Instead of relying entirely on outside cloud providers, the company owns more of the technology stack, from silicon and data collection to model training and the finished consumer product. In plain English, every layer Tesla controls is one less layer where profits can leak to someone else, and also gives them control. I've told you that I wrote the article for Inc. magazine years and years and years ago called From Virtual to Vertical, where I explain how my company had gone just like Tesla did. Started out 100% virtual. He was not quite 100%. Started 100% virtual and went to 100% vertical over the course of several years. And the reasons why we most commonly made the decision: quality control. It was about control. It was about quality. It was about getting consistency in the product. Very rarely was it just to make a little extra money. That infrastructure advantage becomes even more important when you look at where Tesla plans to monetize its AI investment in robotaxis, and they left out Optimus again. Unlike most competitors in autonomous ride-hailing, Tesla isn't just developing the software, it also controls the hardware and much of the computing infrastructure behind it. And once again, for Optimus, that would also be true. Let's compare that approach on robotaxi. The combination makes Tesla resemble a scaled-down hyperscaler rather than a traditional software company. So, robotaxis have spent years trapped behind technological progress and regulatory caution. The balance shifted when Tesla approved legislation creating a statewide framework for autonomous vehicle operations, which Tesla, I'm adding quickly, was able to do. This change gave Tesla a larger runway to expand robotaxi instead of navigating a patchwork of other local approvals. The market still values Tesla largely on vehicle deliveries, autonomous gross margins, and electric vehicle demand. Again, they are missing parts. They're missing the energy storage part, etc. And they're also saying largely, and they don't know what that means. I would say maybe 50%, 40% of the total has to do with hardware. The rest of it has to do with robotaxi and probably Optimus at this point, and maybe the merger. Those remain important metrics, but they may not capture the economics of software-driven transportation, the network. Software businesses often generate higher margins because every additional customer requires little incremental cost. If robotaxi adoption accelerates, Tesla could begin layering recurring software revenue on top of vehicles already rolling off its production lines. Tesla's biggest advantage over rivals like Waymo and Uber isn't just artificial intelligence, it's manufacturing. Waymo must partner with automakers and retrofit existing vehicles with autonomous hardware. Uber depends on outside fleets and third-party drivers. Scaling either model requires coordinating multiple companies and spending a ton of CapEx to add to the fleet. Tesla starts with millions of vehicles already designed around its technology. New vehicles leave the factory prepared for autonomous capability as the software actually improves. The production scale lowers deployment friction and could allow Tesla to expand faster than competitors that must build or modify vehicles one fleet at a time. Well, they don't go to the trouble to tell you that Tesla's planning to build 2 million of these a year. These other guys don't have the remotest opportunity, not a slightest chance at all of being able to compete with that kind of a rollout. Forbes magazine is reporting that the Model YL Premium Launch Series, which is starting at $61,990, shows available, here comes the date, If you're waiting for yours, or if you haven't placed your order yet, October or November 2026 on the Model Y order page as of July 11. For the uninitiated, the Model YL is a longer version, of course, of number 7. U.S. delivery estimates on Tesla's website are dynamic and can vary based on demand, production ramp-ups at Giga Texas, and other factors. The base Model Y is also showing extended delivery dates more than 4 weeks. The long wheelbase Model YL is considered by analysts to be a replacement for the now discontinued Model X, which also has 3 rows of seats. Why the YL for America now? Because Tesla just ended production of the long-running Model X, leaving large 3-row, out there that more people will want and they can't get anymore. The other reason would be they're seeing such good results in China. It just made sense. They've got the capacity. Let's do it. All right, let's see. This is also from Forbes. Copper. We've been talking about copper like every day, right? Twice a day. If you watch the channel, I'm like, how come it's stalled out at 650? How come it's back down to 627? Well, here we go. As substitution kicks in, copper, which is selling for a near record of more than $6 a pound, is being priced out of some markets, forcing a switch by some manufacturers to aluminum. Not all applications are suitable for a direct switch, but the price gap, measured as the copper to aluminum price ratio, has blown out to one of the highest on record. From an investment perspective, that means the copper boom of the past 5 years might have been issued a best buy notice as metal substitution kicks in. One of the best examples of swapping aluminum for copper can be found, swapping aluminum in for copper can be found in the latest cars produced by Ferrari and BMW, which have a higher proportion of aluminum wiring, following a move started by Chinese electric vehicle makers and Tesla. The copper to aluminum ratio has a long run average of 3.7, meaning a pound of copper is traditionally 3.7 times more expensive than aluminum. The latest reading on that ratio is 4.3, with copper at $611 a pound and aluminum at $1.41 per pound. So a switch to aluminum is not simply financial. It brings a weight savings through aluminum wiring needing to be thicker than copper wiring because it has only 61% of the electrical conductivity as copper. Investment banks are watching the widening of the copper to aluminum ratio as a guide to future possible price ratios, as well as looking for a reversal in the current trend. UBS said in a note to clients earlier this week that since 2020, the ratio had averaged 3.7, but over the last 2 months, as the copper price has eased back by around 8% and aluminum has dropped by 16%, the ratio has blown out to 4.3. A high copper to aluminum ratio could drive copper to aluminum substitution, providing source support for aluminum demand relative to copper. But the bank added that the ratio tends to mean revert, but it can take some time to do so. This reflects that behavior substitution sometimes takes time to play through the supply chains, both from a manufacturer's perspective and from a customer preference perspective. While it's hard to identify catalysts ahead of time, we highlight that an elevated copper to aluminum ratio rarely remains that way for long. I know all about this because in the plastics business, you've got oil-based and you've got gas-based or natural gas-based. And in many cases, there's not a ton of difference between the final product, the raw material. You see, you're buying the pellets. When you buy those pellets, and you put it to use, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference on the output of the final product. But there's a ratio. And so as oil prices climb, then there's a point at which it makes sense to switch over to natural gas, which means that the factories that are making the pellets have to switch over. It means that people like in my company, we had to say, okay, at this point, we're going to stop with oil and we're going to switch over to natural gas. But then it can switch. So oil comes barreling down, but natural gas doesn't. And then you're back to, okay, what's my choice now? And typically you're buying your pellets months, if not years in advance. We would place an order for a train load of pellets, which would take, 6 months, 7 months to use up. Or sometimes people are they're buying in the spot market. Other times they're buying with guarantees out over months or years. So this can be going up and down. It's something I'll continue to watch now as we see copper playing around in this one area. So it isn't all about copper. There's the aluminum switch that can be made, which apparently Tesla has already done. All right, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the all the buttons, liking and subscribing and notifying and all those buttons. If you haven't done that, it would certainly be nice of you to do it. And also, let's remember that Nick Gibbs has got that class coming up just about, a little over a month, probably. I don't know I think he set the date. I think it might be the third Saturday. I can't remember. Don't just look it up. Look at the description below. Go look it up because you're already curious about what it costs. And you might be surprised when you find out. That's it for today. This is the last show for today, but you have a full slate tomorrow. I've already done several of the shows that you're going to see tomorrow, including Brian Wang, Kent Marsh, and George. I think George will end up on Monday morning, or maybe Brian Wang will end up on Monday morning. But those three are already in the can. And I can tell you, they are absolutely stunning. Now, speaking of absolutely stunning, and I'm not sure why, there was two extremely good shows today. I mean, we're talking about top shows. And last time I checked, the numbers were not great on either one. First of all, I told you about the show that Sir Basher was going to do. You guys usually like the stuff about retirement investment, et cetera, et cetera. This one wasn't about retirement. It was about your giving to your kids and grandkids and about the new Trump bill. So I'm going to recommend that if you're giving to your kids and grandkids, or if your children are giving to their kids, putting away money for college, there's all these other plans, but in some cases, this new Trump plan is going to be better. In other cases, maybe not. So fabulous show. Gave all the details. And then later in the day was Phil Beisel, which you guys typically really like, but so far the numbers aren't great. And Phil was going into, of course, what else would he be talking about today? He was talking about all of the new AI stuff, about his use of it, his use of the new 4.5 from Grok, comparing it to other kinds of platforms. Anyway, extremely useful. You got to follow AI. Right now, if you're following Tesla, maybe you're also following SpaceX. Both of them, their future, believe me, it's not about hardware. It's about AI. Now, that could be inside hardware, like the article talked about. It could be inside Robotaxi. It could be inside Optimus, but it's still the AI business, and it's very important for you as an investor to understand all that. Okay, I'll get out of here. That's enough. It has been great talking to you.